Welcome to the dairies of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. Enjoy the journey. The crystal hall shimmered under a cascade of suspended lights, each orb floating lazily, casting rainbows across the polished floor that seemed almost liquid. The alien nobles, a mix of shifting holographic forms, translucent beings, and those with glimmering, reflective skin, whispered in tonal harmonies that made the air itself vibrate with anticipation. At the far end, the queen appeared, stepping from a corridor lined with hovering floral arrangements that seemed to hum softly in tune with her pulse. Her silver hair, braided along one side, caught the light like threads of liquid moon, and her long, elegant ears curved backward as if conducting some invisible orchestra. The crowd's murmurs stilled. The queen's presence alone was a gravity well of authority. She raised her hand, and the floating orbs blinked in acknowledgement, their gentle bobbing punctuating the sudden hush. "I have news," she began, her voice carrying clearly over the subtle hum of the hall. "I am with child." A ripple of astonishment passed through the assembly. One noble whose form shimmered like spun glass almost toppled into a hovering fountain, murmuring to himself, "Well, that escalated faster than predicted." A few others snorted quietly behind jewel-encrusted masks. The queen's eyes, glimmering like liquid mercury, scanned the room before narrowing just slightly. Then she did the unthinkable. She pointed. Not to a noble, not to an advisor, but directly at the human standing stiffly near the entrance, one hand clutching a datapad as if it were a shield. The man's jaw dropped, and a tiny hoverbot zoomed past him, narrowly missing his shoulder, as if the universe itself was punctuating the moment. Whispers erupted into outright chatter. Someone muttered, Did she just say he?" Another added, "I hope his insurance covers interspecies pregnancy scandals." The human, a historian who had always considered himself awkward but harmless, shuffled forward as if pulled by invisible strings, tripping over the edge of a levitating rug that had no earthly reason to exist. He managed to catch himself, narrowly avoiding a collision with a hovering orb that blinked disapprovingly at his clumsiness. The queen's lips curved ever so slightly at his antics, though her eyes retained the steady gleam of command. "Sir," she said, her voice now both firm and surprisingly gentle, "you will accompany me." The man's mind raced. Accompany her where? For what reason? Did she mean lunch, interstellar diplomacy, or some form of ceremonial alien interrogation that might involve zero-gravity restraint? He swallowed hard, imagining all the worst-case scenarios, including being turned into a diplomatic hors d'oeuvre. Meanwhile, the nobles around them debated in urgent whispers. One translucent advisor adjusted the floating holomask over his face, muttering, "Do we even have a protocol for this?" Another suggested, with dry humor that cut through the tension like a laser scalpel, "Send in the human with flowers and hope for the best." A ripple of suppressed laughter followed, softening the absurdity of the moment. The queen gestured toward a platform that slowly descended from the ceiling, glowing faintly, the edges lined with flowing inscriptions that shifted like liquid writing. "Come," she said, as if the situation were entirely ordinary. The human stepped forward cautiously, trying to maintain dignity but failing spectacularly as his foot hovered a fraction above the platform, and refused to land until he gave it a stern pep talk. The queen's delicate laugh, musical and unexpected, filled the hall. It was brief, but it broke something, a wall of anxiety, suspicion, and disbelief, and left a strange warmth in its wake. As they ascended together, the whispers of the court swirling like a storm of static, the human caught a glance of the queen's profile. Her silver hair, the way her ears curved with subtle elegance, the faint shimmer of her skin reflecting the suspended lights. Amid the chaos, he realized that he was not just a pawn in an alien political spectacle. He was at the center of a universe-shaking revelation, one that was absurd, terrifying, and he had to admit, entirely captivating. The court watched them, a mixture of awe, scandal, and restrained amusement, as the human struggled to keep up with the queen's measured steps. Somewhere behind him, a small drone tried to deliver a ceremonial drink but collided midair with a passing advisor, resulting in a sparkling shower that made someone mutter, "Best entertainment we've had in centuries." The human glanced at the queen, whose faint smile suggested she noticed it too. And in that moment between chaos and ceremony, between laughter and shock, the improbable adventure began. He had no idea what awaited him, and she seemed entirely unbothered by that fact. The universe, it seemed, was already leaning toward absurdity, and he was standing right in its path. The morning after the announcement was a strange sort of chaos, quiet at first, like the calm before a storm, but a storm that smelled faintly of ozone and mint, courtesy of the palace's automated scent regulators. The human awoke in a guest chamber that seemed to hover slightly above the floor, the gravity subtly adjustable with panels on the wall that he never dared to touch. The bed itself was suspended in midair, gently rocking as if it had opinions about his sleeping habits. He had barely managed to sit up when a hovering tray slid beside him, delivering a breakfast that glimmered faintly and occasionally levitated its components in polite little pirouettes. "Thanks," he muttered, poking at a luminous egg that tried to float off his fork, "I think." Outside the chamber, the palace buzzed with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and the occasional sarcastic remark. The human followed a corridor lined with holographic advisors projecting floating blueprints and historical records, muttering cryptically to themselves. One of them, a translucent figure whose form shimmered with the colors of shifting nebulae, gave him a pointed look. "You understand the implications, yes?" It asked in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with static. The human blinked. "I think so." The advisor tilted its head, its holographic eyes spinning in slow, hypnotic circles. "Ah. Then proceed with caution, or, failing that, at least with flair." It vanished, leaving the human to wonder whether that had been advice or a polite warning that he might explode everything accidentally. In the central council chamber, the queen awaited, her long ears twitching subtly as she observed him approach. The chamber itself was a marvel of science fiction excess. Floating platforms spiraled above a floor of transparent crystal that revealed a galaxy-like pattern beneath. Tiny drones hovering in arcs to record every gesture and expression. She gestured to a seat beside her, though it hovered slightly higher than the floor to accommodate her presence, and he tripped slightly trying to reach it, earning a tiny laugh from her. Not a laugh of mockery, something warmer, lighter, that made him feel absurdly human and absurdly small at the same time. Advisors began their questioning, hovering tablets projecting charts of alien biology, interspecies genetics, and social protocol in three-dimensional spinning forms. One holographic display showed a floating model of a womb that glimmered in shifting shades of sapphire and emerald, and the human tried not to recoil at the complexity of it. "So, he began, "I just need to, what? Sign some forms, wave at it occasionally." The queen raised an eyebrow, though the corners of her mouth hinted at amusement. "It is not a spectator sport," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made him straighten up instantly. Amid the serious science and delicate politics, humor found its way in. One drone, misfiring slightly, flung a small holographic fish toward him, which he caught instinctively, earning a clap from one of the nobles, a shimmer of approval that seemed entirely absurd. Another noble muttered, "Perhaps he is more suitable for fatherhood than we realized," and the human felt the urge to wave like a contestant on a bizarre game show. The day stretched on with consultations, each more elaborate than the last. He found himself learning alien etiquette, which included subtle ear flicks, precise breathing rhythms, and the correct way to nod without appearing threatening to beings whose bodies could shift transparency at will. In quiet moments, the queen offered small lessons herself, leaning closer than protocol allowed, her voice gentle as she explained the floating language of the palace's AI companions. Her humor shone through. A flick of her ear, a quip about how humans must find zero-gravity dining very challenging. And the human laughed genuinely, the tension melting away, replaced by a curious camaraderie. By evening, the palace hummed with energy as news of their interactions leaked through the drones to the rest of the court. The human felt both overwhelmed and oddly empowered, a feeling he had never known before. He realized, with a mixture of awe and amusement, that the queen was teaching him not only about alien society, but about patience, observation, and the subtle art of surviving while standing at the center of a scandal that could reshape an empire. Somewhere in that vast, luminous palace, he began to understand that this bizarre journey, terrifying as it was, held possibilities far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Even as he left the council chamber, a small drone buzzed close to him, projecting a holographic banner that read, "Warning, do not trip over floating rugs." He looked at the queen, whose slight smile acknowledged the absurdity of it all, and he laughed aloud, the sound carrying across the hall, mingling with the soft hum of orbiting lights and whispers of a court adjusting to a future that was impossibly unpredictable, and in the strangest way promising. The following morning, the palace corridors felt almost alive, humming with the gentle vibration of suspended lights and the whisper of hovering platforms adjusting their positions for incoming dignitaries. The human followed the queen through a series of chambers, each more elaborate than the last, and he could not help but marvel at the subtle humor built into every element of the palace. One hallway featured portraits that winked at passers-by, including a particularly mischievous rendering of the queen herself, which made him chuckle despite the lingering tension of the past days. They entered a vast observation deck where the city below shimmered like a circuit board of living lights, towers spiraling with glimmering energy and transport drones zipping silently between them. The queen gestured toward a hovering console projecting interlaced patterns of alien social networks and genetic records. "Your presence here," she said, "is under scrutiny not just by the court, but by every system connected to this empire." The human swallowed, imagining a cosmic scoreboard where he had just been thrust into the wrong league. "So, I'm basically a celebrity now?" he asked, half joking, and she allowed herself the smallest flicker of amusement, the corners of her eyes crinkling ever so slightly. The council reconvened, with holographic displays projecting potential scenarios for governance and interspecies child-rearing. One model displayed floating embryos encased in shimmering fluid spheres, orbiting miniature suns that simulated the Empire's homeworld's radiation cycles. The human recoiled slightly. Do I need to, I mean, are we feeding it?" The queen's lips curved with dry humor. "Do you always ask such questions, or only when the stakes involve the future of my lineage?" The human flushed but smiled, appreciating her subtle way of mocking formality without breaking her composure. Advisors debated the ramifications of a human father, some glowing with excitement at the scientific possibilities, others muttering ominous warnings about social unrest. One particularly officious holographic projection insisted that the human be tested for interspecies compatibility, a process involving tiny nanobots that hovered around him like impatient fireflies. "This is ticklish," he protested when a swarm brushed his arm, sending an involuntary shiver through him. The queen's laugh, soft and musical, echoed across the chamber, earning a few startled glances from the court. "Do try to remain dignified," she said, though her tone suggested she found his discomfort amusing. After the session, the queen led him to a private garden, a dome filled with floating flora and gravity-defying streams that arched like liquid glass. Here she spoke more openly, sharing stories of past heirs, absurd court customs, and her own occasional frustrations with a system that valued protocol over reason. Humor became their bridge. She demonstrated the proper way to nod gravely, while a drone sprinkled sparkling pollen in his hair, which she promptly flicked at him with a mischievous grin. The human laughed, the tension of days dissolving into shared absurdity, realizing that connection could form not only through duty but through the simplest acts of amusement. Evening fell, and the council reconvened with intergalactic envoys who demanded explanations, protocols, and reassurance. The human, previously paralyzed by fear, now navigated the sessions with a hesitant but growing confidence, occasionally using humor to diffuse tension, making a small joke about the impossibility of correctly curtsying in zero gravity, which earned him a ripple of suppressed laughter even from the most rigid dignitaries. The queen, observing him, allowed herself a rare expression of approval. By the end of the day, the palace was quiet again, lights dimmed to a soft hum, and the human realized he was no longer merely a bewildered outsider. He had begun to understand the delicate choreography of alien politics, the humor hidden in serious faces, and the strange, magnetic pull that bound him to the queen. Standing beside her on a balcony overlooking the city, he caught her gaze, and for a fleeting moment the universe seemed to pause, as if acknowledging that the improbable bond forming between them was not only real but significant. Even amidst the absurdity, the danger, and the weight of expectations, there was warmth, laughter, and the faint, thrilling promise of a new, unpredictable chapter in both their lives. The palace had taken on an almost conspiratorial air as rumors of the queen's pregnancy spread beyond the immediate court. Everywhere the human went, he noticed subtle shifts. Hovering advisors whispering behind iridescent screens, drones skimming past with exaggerated diligence, and holographic notices popping up in hallways with cryptic warnings like, "Do not trip near dignitaries," or "Refrain from excessive eyebrow raising." The human tried to keep a low profile, which was nearly impossible when every other being seemed intent on turning him into a walking spectacle. That morning, a delegation of fringe nobles arrived from the outer provinces, their forms shimmering with erratic colors, as though their own nervous energy distorted their appearance. They hovered in the council chamber, which was now lined with transparent panels projecting the swirling constellations of the Empire's home system. Their leader, a thin, almost translucent figure whose eyes glowed a faint violet, leaned toward the human with a conspiratorial hiss. "We cannot allow this interloper to influence the line of succession," he whispered, as if the room were not already filled with observers. The human blinked, trying to process the words, and muttered under his breath, "I'm just here for the tour and occasional awkward hovering gestures." The queen stepped forward, her presence commanding a sudden hush. "The child's future, and by extension the empire's stability, rests on truth, reason, and, dare I say, humor," she said, tilting her head in a way that made the human wonder if she were genuinely amused or issuing a subtle threat. He coughed nervously, imagining the empire's press release. "Human father survives another council session without catastrophe." The room did not laugh, but the tiny hovering drones blinked as though in sympathy. Later, the human was led to the palace's biolaboratories, a vast space filled with levitating test tubes, streaming light matrices, and hovering displays of embryonic development projected in exquisite detail. He watched as nanobots carefully examined alien cells, swirling around like miniature stars in orbit, and felt his stomach flip. "So, I just watch?" he asked, glancing at the queen, who tilted her head, the long ears twitching subtly. "Observation is a critical component of parenthood," she said dryly. "Besides, you seem to have a knack for amusing the court unintentionally. That talent may prove vital." The human blinked, imagining himself as the court jester by accident, and gave a weak, self-conscious laugh. As the day progressed, small incidents of absurdity punctuated the tension. A misprogrammed drone projected a holographic chicken mid-meeting, prompting one elder noble to mutter. Finally, a being more confused than the human, earning a suppressed chuckle from several others. The human used these moments as practice, attempting to blend humor with diplomacy, awkwardly waving and offering mild apologies for being the cause of unintentional entertainment. The Queen's subtle glances confirmed that she appreciated his efforts, and the human felt a flicker of pride. In the evening, the Queen guided him through a private zero-gravity garden dome, where plants floated lazily and streams of luminous water arced in impossible patterns. Here, conversation drifted from politics to shared anecdotes, the Queen recounting her tutors, failed attempts to teach gravity lessons using stilts, and the human sharing tales of human office blunders. Laughter bubbled between them, a balm for the constant scrutiny outside. At one point, a small floating bloom brushed the human's shoulder, prompting him to exclaim, "I swear these plants are conspiring against me." And the Queen laughed, the sound ringing clear in the dome. By nightfall, the human had begun to grasp his role not merely as an outsider caught in scandal, but as an active participant shaping the unfolding story. The court remained tense, the empire watchful, but within the quiet of the dome, amid floating flowers and laughter, a fragile, growing trust formed. The improbable alliance between human and queen, strengthened by humor, shared bewilderment, and mutual curiosity, began to feel less like a temporary accident and more like a deliberate, if unpredictable, path toward something entirely new. And somewhere deep in the palace, the universe itself seemed to pause, as if awaiting the next, inevitably chaotic step. The palace was unusually busy that morning, the corridors alive with a kind of restless energy that made the human's head spin. Delegations from neighboring star systems had arrived, their ships hovering silently in the sky above, casting shifting, prismatic reflections across the palace's crystalline domes. Each envoy seemed more ornate and intimidating than the last, with shimmering robes that rippled like liquid metal and hovering assistants who spoke in overlapping languages, some of which he couldn't even begin to pronounce. The human tried to stand tall, imagining himself as a calm, composed representative of Earth. But the second he raised a hand, a passing drone bumped it, sending a holographic map spinning and making him look like he was conducting an interstellar orchestra. The Queen followed, her presence immediately commanding the room. Her long ears twitched with subtle amusement as she regarded him, the hint of a smile softening the tension. "Do try to keep up," she said, though her voice carried a playful undertone. The human muttered something about gravity, dignity, and intergalactic diplomacy, earning a small, quiet laugh from her that made his ears warm with embarrassment and pride at the same time. The envoys assembled in the Grand Council chamber, where floating platforms arranged themselves into concentric circles to accommodate their various heights, forms, and anti-gravity preferences. Holographic displays lit the space, showing star maps, planetary alliances, and the projected implications of an interspecies heir on galactic politics. The human's eyes darted between charts, trying not to faint at the sheer complexity of the situation, while one particularly officious envoy leaned over to whisper, "Your people are interesting," in a tone that suggested both admiration and mild disbelief. The human offered a shaky smile, imagining how he'd explain this to anyone back on Earth. Discussions began, formal and tense, but humor managed to creep in. The human attempted a joke about how intergalactic meetings should always come with snacks, which landed awkwardly at first until a hovering assistant projected a holographic pastry in response, complete with tiny animated sprinkles that winked at him. Even the Queen allowed herself a small chuckle, her eyes glimmering like twin stars. The room's energy shifted subtly. While the stakes remained sky-high, there was room for absurdity, and he clung to that as a lifeline. As the debates continued, a sudden technical anomaly sent a series of floating data tablets spinning like leaves caught in a windstorm. The human instinctively leapt forward, catching one tablet and accidentally sending a flurry of holographic charts colliding with an envoy's floating robes. The chamber froze for a heartbeat before laughter rippled through the group, the absurdity of the moment breaking some of the tension. The Queen raised an eyebrow, her subtle smile betraying her amusement, and the human realized that, for the first time, he was participating rather than merely surviving. Later, she led him to a private observation balcony, overlooking the city below where aerial vehicles weaved like glowing threads between towers. "You're adapting," she said, her tone both approving and teasing. He swallowed, realizing she was right. Amid the absurdity, the chaos, and the ever-present scrutiny, he was learning, laughing, and holding his own. She shared a small story about a previous council meeting where a diplomat's hover platform had inexplicably flown into the ceiling, eliciting a laugh that echoed through the balcony. The human couldn't resist recounting his own mishap with the spinning tablets, earning a delighted shake of her head and a playful flick of her ear. By nightfall, the palace had settled into a quiet hum, the stars reflected in the domes like distant lanterns. The human felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had survived interstellar scrutiny, accidental chaos, and a flurry of absurdities, all while discovering a strange sense of partnership with the Queen. Their laughter, shared in fleeting moments amidst political storms, had become a secret bond. The future remained unpredictable, fraught with tension, and heavily monitored by the Empire. But for the first time, the human felt that together, he and the Queen could face whatever cosmic absurdities awaited them. And somewhere in the silent hum of the palace, the universe seemed to lean closer, curious about what these two improbable allies might do next. By the time the sixth day arrived, the palace had settled into a rhythm that was both dizzying and strangely comforting. The human found himself waking to the gentle hum of floating lights, their soft pulses marking time as if the entire structure breathed with him. The Queen awaited him in the atrium, her long ears flicking subtly as he approached, and for the first time, he felt a measure of ease in her presence. He no longer stumbled over every hovering rug or spilled holographic chart. Instead, he moved with tentative confidence, earning a faint nod of approval that made him straighten a little taller, though his shoes, gravity-adjusted for alien floors, continued to betray him. The morning was dedicated to the biolaboratories, where the human witnessed the subtle dance of interspecies life. Tiny nanobots swirled around him like impatient fireflies, projecting holographic models of cellular fusion, the intricate ballet of DNA strands weaving together in brilliant neon patterns. He watched in awe, asking questions and receiving explanations that were equal parts technical and humorous. The chief scientist joking that humans often preferred simpler, messier methods to create life, like sandwiches and stubborn optimism. The human laughed, imagining how an Earth scientist might respond to this, and the Queen tilted her head, a faint glimmer of amusement in her eyes. Later, she guided him to the palace's private zero-gravity garden, a sanctuary of floating flora, streams of liquid light, and pollen that shimmered like stardust. Here, conversation drifted away from protocol to the stories that connected them. The Queen spoke of her childhood lessons with gravity, recounting how she had been forced to balance on stilts to understand the concept of weightlessness, only to topple into an experimental pond, much to the amusement of her tutors. The human shared tales of human office disasters, complete with hovering coffee cups and printer explosions, and she laughed, the sound clear and musical echoing across the dome. Each story, each shared laugh, wove them closer together, the tension of the court melting into genuine connection. In the afternoon, the court convened to discuss interstellar concerns, alliances, planetary trade, and the implications of an interspecies heir. The human participated, no longer the wide-eyed outsider but a voice with measured insight, albeit punctuated by occasional humor to break the tension. When a holographic projection misfired, sending swirling charts into the chamber, he seized the moment, catching one midair and joking about his newfound skill as a cosmic juggler. The room paused, then a ripple of laughter passed through even the sternest delegates. The Queen's subtle smile told him he had passed some invisible test, and he felt a thrill of accomplishment. Evening brought the quiet intimacy of observation decks, where the human and queen could speak without protocol. They watched the city below, lights weaving like threads between towers and aerial vehicles performing impossible arcs. The queen's voice was softer now, tinged with vulnerability as she discussed her hopes, fears, and the weight of expectation that came with her role. The human listened, offering his own reflections on responsibility, trust, and the strange luck that had brought them together. They shared small jokes, the queen teasing him about zero-gravity etiquette, the human retorting about alien hover toilets, and in their laughter, the distance between species, rank, and expectation began to vanish. By nightfall, the palace hummed gently under the stars. The human realized with both awe and a quiet warmth that he had begun to accept his role, not just as the father of an alien heir, but as a partner, a confidant and a participant in a world far larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. Amid the floating lights, whispered humor and subtle gravity shifts, a bond had formed between him and the queen that was no longer tentative or accidental. It was deliberate, resilient, and against all odds real. The universe beyond their palace walls was vast, unpredictable, and brimming with challenges. Yet for the first time he felt ready to face it, not alone but together. The day dawned with a quiet brilliance, the palace's crystalline domes reflecting the distant sun like a cluster of stars, suspended in delicate equilibrium. The human awoke feeling an unfamiliar steadiness, a sense that the weeks of chaos, uncertainty, and accidental heroism had shaped him into someone he barely recognized, but in the best way. He followed the queen through the hallways, past hovering orbs and subtle glimmers of light, and for the first time, he did not stumble over his own feet, nor did the floating rugs conspire against him. The palace seemed to acknowledge his progress, humming softly in rhythm with his footsteps. The council gathered one last time, the great chamber now calm yet thrumming with significance. Envoys from distant systems filled the floating platforms, their robes less intimidating now, their stares softened by the human's steady presence. The queen stood beside him, poised and radiant, her long ears flicking slightly as she regarded him with an expression that combined approval, amusement, and trust. The human felt the weight of expectation balanced by something lighter, almost irreverent, a quiet confidence earned through humor, observation, and the slow navigation of a universe that had at first seemed intent on overwhelming him. As the discussion commenced, the human found himself speaking with clarity and authority, bridging cultures with insight and occasional levity. When a technical display went haywire, sending swirling holographic maps into the air, he caught one mid-flight and quipped, "Ah, interstellar chaos, my old friend," earning laughter that rippled through the chamber. The queen's subtle smile told him he had earned his place, not merely as an interloper, but as someone capable of shaping events through courage, thoughtfulness, and a willingness to laugh at the absurdity of circumstance. The envoys, witnessing this unlikely human navigating alien protocols, murmured in approval, and one even muttered, "Perhaps Earthlings have untapped potential after all." After the council, the human and queen retreated to the zero-gravity garden dome, their private sanctuary. Here, amid floating flora and luminous streams of water, they spoke of what had passed. The gossiping nobles, the bewildering science, the near disasters of diplomacy and decorum. They laughed over his early mishaps, tripping over hoverrugs, mismanaging nanobot swarms, mispronouncing alien terms, and she teased him about his remarkable ability to turn panic into charm. Humor had become their tether, connecting them in ways formal ceremonies never could. As evening settled, the queen's hand found his, their fingers interlacing with quiet certainty. Together they looked out across the city, towers and vehicles casting intricate patterns of light over the glassy streets. "We have changed each other," he said, voice low but certain. She nodded, her eyes reflecting both the stars above and the life growing within her. "And the Empire has changed with us," she replied, her tone calm but unwavering. Later, the human stood before the court, no longer the bewildered outsider but a partner in the shaping of a future unlike anything previously imagined. The nobles, once skeptical, offered subtle nods, their whispers now full of cautious optimism rather than scandal. Delegates from neighboring systems had accepted the unprecedented union, intrigued by the possibility of stability, curiosity, and the bridging of species. The human realized that he had grown, from someone hesitant and overwhelmed into someone capable of influence, courage, and even levity amidst monumental responsibility. The queen and the human stepped together onto the observation balcony as the stars began to shimmer above the city. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the palace and the soft glow of distant constellations. The weight of expectation, the absurdity of the early days, the laughter, and the shared chaos coalesced into a profound sense of unity. They were partners, parents, and improbable allies in a universe vast enough to challenge them at every turn. As they stood side by side, the Empire's future unfolded before them, a tapestry of possibilities woven from trust, courage, and humor. The human realized that life, no matter how chaotic or overwhelming, could be faced with a steady heart and a willingness to laugh. And in that understanding, the story found its quiet closure. The improbable had become inevitable, the chaotic delightful, and the future, shared, unpredictable, and full of wonder, beckoned them forward together.